is about queer issues and queer-related questions. So that's one avenue. Another avenue is that I've been the owner and creative director of PMK Floral Arts, which is a boutique floral design company in New York City. I've been in business for about 20 years, and I deal primarily with private clients, mostly doing event work, and a lot of my work is in the world of television. So like one of my clients is the Today Show. This is sort of my fun gig. I do the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade every year. So that's kind of a
that little thing.
Yeah, so that's always a fun little challenge every year.
And I see you've done The Late Show with Seth Meyers, so the Today Show. You've done some great, and friend of NGLCC, Martha Stewart, featured you in the Weddings magazine, I hear.
Yeah. And yeah, that was a while ago. We did a wedding on the plaza at Rockefeller Center.
Wow.
So yeah, that was a small job. And I've been a member of NGLCC for, I believe, 5 years now, and was certified within my first year.
Thank you.
And it's, it's such an interesting group of people and skills and talents. And that was part of the reason why I approached you about this particular workshop. Because when I contacted you, I said that I noticed a disconnect often between the programming, which is very practical oriented and very necessary. But I notice at the events I'm at sort of how much creativity is in the room, and sort of the kinds of other conversations people are having and not having. And I thought it'd be really interesting to sort of dig into the question of creativity, because what I've been doing for the past 2 years is working as what I call a creativity guide. So the sort of short version of that is I'm a project whisperer. So I work with individuals and companies, sort of as a coach, sort of as a mentor, as a way of guiding people through their creative issues or projects. And I use the word project because it doesn't necessarily have to be art related.
Mm-hmm.
It can be entrepreneur related. And I'm finding a lot of the people I work with are people who have expertise in one area and are trying to sort of move that expertise into a different form or a different arena, and need some sort of guidance along the way. And as an artist myself, I've never had a project where someone didn't help me. I have to do the work myself, obviously, but there are the go-to people that I complain to, or look for guidance, or cry on their shoulder, or get feedback from too. So with my experience owning a business and with my own experience as an artist, I was trying to sort of come up with a way of using that knowledge in one direction, because I think often, and I think this is true for entrepreneurs and creatives, because we wear so many hats,
sure.
We don't necessarily have the neatest, shortest elevator pitch. And, I've found myself at sort of some networking events, and it, it can be kind of lonely if you can't really say like just the one thing you do or the one box you fit in, that can be problematic. And, I would think for an organization for queer people, we shouldn't have to fit into a box. And there should be a lot of room to maneuver. So that was part of why I wanted to get this conversation going.
Well, that's exactly right. And and this dovetails perfectly with a conversation we actually had at our last webinar Wednesday, which was very much about being conscious and in the moment. And I would not have thought, as we learned from last week's presenter, about deep guided breathing and centering yourself to get into a good, clear headspace for a business context. And I'm really excited to hear you talk a little bit about some of the questions that we went over, things like So what is creative entrepreneurship? And I ask that because, to your point, we go into some of these spaces, the NGLCC family reunions that we have at local affiliate events, and of course, our national conference and things like that, where you see so many creative types, to your point, saying, I don't make a widget. So it's really quite hard to talk about what I do in an abstract, especially with other non-artists. And yet we also find that we have so many brilliant artists who have used that creative mindset to pivot into being great business people. And I remember once Jennifer Brown of Jennifer Brown Consulting, who does phenomenal diversity and inclusion training with so many of our corporate partners, spoke at one of our corporate advisory council meetings and knocked everyone's socks off by singing a few bars from an opera, because she used to be an opera singer, and talked so brilliantly about how understanding staging and phrasing and lighting and presentation, all of that, makes her a significantly better business person.
Absolutely.
So talk to us about creative entrepreneurship.
So I think what I mean by that, and I'm very interested in sort of collapsing the distinctions between artists and, business people. There's a famous quote from Oscar Wilde where he said that whenever he spoke with bankers, they only wanted to talk about art, but that when he spoke with artists, they only wanted to talk about money. So I think there's, we share so many of the same concerns and questions and process questions as well. Right. And, we have this idea that artists aren't practical and business people aren't creative. When nothing could be further than the truth. If you read, historically about someone like Michelangelo, just his sourcing for marble for sculpture was such a complicated process that he was very intimately involved with, because that was the thing that made, his reputation. But it was questions of, supply chains, and he was the one who selected the marble and then had to arrange, this complicated transportation to get the marble from the quarry to Rome, and then, pay the people and have a staff and have a studio and manage all of that, aside from just making the work. So I would say the same thing, like when I do the Thanksgiving Day parade, it's some pretty flowers on TV that you see, but there's international supply chains to get that product. There's questions about how you work with unions on a television set. Questions again about lighting. How does that affect what's in the arrangement? Temperature, that parade's outside every year. I lose a night's sleep hoping they don't freeze, because flower petals are primarily water. And, if it dips below 32 degrees overnight, that's it, they're done. And then there's questions of staffing and transportation. And, so everyone's job is hard in some sort of secret way, and part of what we get paid for is the hard part, and people just see the nice thing that happens at the end. But I think, as entrepreneurs, you have to be enormously creative to do that. Because basically, like an artist, you're making something out of nothing. You have an interesting idea, you have an inspiration, you see a better way of doing something, and then you have to make that thing real in the world. And if that's not creativity, I don't know what is, and that takes, a sense of vision and a sense of risk and experimenting. And, so once you get into that, I think those things overlap, tremendously. I really don't see a particular difference aside from this distinction that we make ourselves, that, artists do one thing and business people do another. Sure. And I think too, as the world of work changes, and certainly we're moving into a huge transformation of the world of work, we are all called to do many different things and work much more self-sufficiently, which calls on all kinds of creativity. And even if it's just something as simple as, well, what is my background for my Zoom meeting now? Now that's, that's a creative choice you have to make. I have my news anchor bookcase behind me, but, but there's small things, but we're all going to have to continue to be much more self-sufficient and make many more decisions about how we engage with our work. So I think, you know, let's.
Oh, I'm sorry. Which leads to the sort of perfect segue question, which is, okay, we absolutely have to do that to be successful, but how does someone who doesn't see themselves as creative tap into that? How do we start, cracking open that stone and getting some water out?
Well, first of all, the simple answer is like, just get over that. You know, everybody has that story of, you know, the teacher who kind of was like, what are you doing? That's terrible. You know, your finger painting sucks. I hope your teacher didn't say that particular phrase, but you know, we all have a lot of stories about, you know, what it means to be creative and who is and who isn't. And I think particularly for queer people, who are generally seen as creatives, there can be a lot of shame around that and a lot of resistance to owning that. I mean, I think, you know, I was not an athletic child, and I was, you know, people would say, well, you were artistic. And there's so much judgment that comes with saying, you know, behind that word. You know, so it's an acknowledgement of skill, but at the same time, it's really an acknowledgement of difference and, you know, not quite being okay. So I think we carry a lot of that into our work sort of unconsciously. And part of what I try to do with people is really sort of unpack that. But I think, you know, again, if you can look at your basic thing that you're doing, which is making something that doesn't exist and getting it out in the world, that is a creative act. There's the Irish philosopher, John O'Donoghue, who says that, you know, we are all artists because we have to make our lives, and how we engage with our lives and how we engage with our day is making a work of art. Yeah. So I think, you know, approach it from that standpoint, have some fun with that.
Well, and that is so deeply connected to messaging that we share all the time at the NGLCC, which is LGBT people are the entrepreneurs of their own lives. They've always had to decide when the move was right, when the network was right to all the things that you would apply to a business also apply to our personal lives in our own individual queer journeys. So talk a little bit about that intersection between being LGBTQ and creativity, and how that can be an added benefit to us. You already mentioned a little bit about just tapping an already sort of deeply creative network, but on a practical business sense, you know, we've been talking a lot about, especially through the COVID crisis, businesses coming together to support each other. You know, now's the perfect time to build that website, get that graphic made, get your swag printed for when business returns. And all of those require creatives, and creatives that you can meet through our LGBT business family. So very interested in your thoughts on that intersection.
Well, I think, you know, the intersection is, in many ways, it's our superpower. I mean, I always refer to it as our superpower because I think, and it's changing now because culture is starting to change. But I think for all of us, the process of coming out, the experience of recognizing our difference early on, and sort of how we either accepted that or didn't, or struggled with it or didn't. On some fundamental level, we had a realization that something else was going to be possible for us, and that the lives around us and the lives that we were sort of, you know, raised to expect were not going to be for us. And in many ways, you know, that's enormously freeing because something else is possible. And we have the opportunity to do something else and to live in a different way. And I think sort of cultivating that knowledge, you know, it's kind of radar that we just carry with us now. And I think too, sort of, again, media has changed so much, but, you know, I'm 53. When I was growing up, and watching, movies with straight couples, and sort of, you had to imagine your way into that story because you knew that wasn't what you wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just that act of imagination, that act of saying, okay, here's a story, I don't see myself in it, but I can find a way for myself to participate in that and imagine a different outcome. That is an enormous skill to have. And I think particularly in business, and as an artist too, I mean, that's always the question: what is possible? Is this thing possible? Is this idea possible? And, what other story can I imagine? And, we're at a moment of profound creativity, as terrifying as it is and upsetting as it is in some ways. We're going to have to reimagine a lot of things. And I think as queer people and queer entrepreneurs, we just do that as a matter of course. And I think, because our needs are different, that helps us find, interesting solutions. I mean, even something like NGLCC, that began as a need. There was a space that didn't exist. There was something that, we needed a place to be. And, Justin imagined that. But that grew out of a need. An example I like to use often is there's a language called Polari, which, this is sort of obscure, but it was invented in England. Probably it was after the Second World War, and it was gay men invented a language of their own, and not just sort of camp phrases that we use amongst ourselves. It was an actual language with a huge vocabulary and a huge structure that they could speak in public, that no one would know what they were talking about, but it was the safe way for them to talk publicly. Like, you'd be sitting at the bus stop and think, oh, who's that sexy man that walked by? You could say that to your friend in Polari and, not have to face any consequences for that. So I think, A, the need was so enormous, but B, the response to that need was so imaginative and creative, that a whole language grew out of that. And if anybody's curious, there's a short film on YouTube that's done entirely in Polari. It's just crazy to watch. So I highly recommend it. So
that's really neat. And actually that's a great chance for us to check in with everyone and remind folks who are listening. We've got a lot of folks attending through video and also on the phone. If you've got questions as we go on for Peter's brilliant creative mind, use the Q&A tab. Sabrina Kent from our team is monitoring that closely, and we're happy to answer. Actually, a couple of questions that have come in over email in anticipation of this workshop, Peter, were about roadblocks from business owners, very successful ones, saying, I wish I could be more creative. I think I'm my own worst enemy because I stand in my own way and doubt myself. Talk to us about chipping away. How do we get through and unleash that potential?
Well, first of all, I would say, welcome to the club.
Yeah.
Everybody has that question. And I include myself in all of this too. I struggle with that
with a lot of your clients in the corporate world too, where we just how to begin.
Yeah, because it's an interesting thing. And one thing I've noticed is, I think as entrepreneurs, we like a challenge. And as creatives, we like a challenge. But sometimes we make the challenge of doing the work, getting to our desks. We make that the challenge instead of the actual work being the challenge, the thing we're making be the challenge. And a lot of that is just, it's common sense. It's fear. It's that risk of not knowing, but not knowing is the key to creativity, because the minute you know, then you're done. So you've kind of shut off the avenue to discovery. And I think where people often feel like they're not creative is that sense of, oh, I'm sitting down at my desk. I should know what I'm doing. And I don't know, therefore I'm not creative, or I'm failing in some way. When instead, you're supposed to sit down at your desk and say, I don't really know. And then that's where, energy can start to come in. That's where ideas can start to come in. And that's the very freeing thing, because, you can get into those sort of what if questions and sort of, well, what if this happened? Or what if I tried this? Or, and I think one thing that I'm noticing a lot now, and I'm very sensitive to it, is we're getting bombarded, with emails about sort of like, this is how we're going to get through it, and this is the answer, and this is what comes next. And it kind of, it makes me a little angry, because I'm like, nobody really knows, and it's okay, not to know. And I think we're at a moment where, yes, we've all had to be sort of very nimble and adaptive very quickly for this initial hump, but we're at a point now where I think, wisdom can be found in sort of slowing down and asking better questions, because we can have sort of 10 very short, simple ideas that'll be good for a month, but because this situation is so volatile and changing so quickly, that answer may not work in 2 weeks. So can we slow down a little bit? Can we listen more? Because I think the place most people get stuck is in listening, because it's uncomfortable to sort of really quiet down and sort of, you mentioned earlier, somebody was talking about breathing meditations and sort of how vital that is. And it's the same process of, learning to listen to yourself, learning to be quiet and cultivating some quiet, because that's where the really big ideas are. That's where the really juicy stuff is. And I think we face a lot of pressure culturally that, we're not being positive if we say we don't know, or we're scared. And I think, business communication, artistic communication, we're liable to a lot of sort of fads and buzzwords. And I think a lot of those, can undercut creativity and quiet, because there's an expectation that, like, saying, I'm scared and I don't know the answer, somehow is interpreted as not being positive. And to me, I think, if we can't be scared and not know at this moment in time, I don't know when we ever can.
Yes.
Like, this would seem to be the moment where we're really allowed to say that. But that's also an admission of that something else is possible.
Yeah.
And I think, you can't force creativity, you can't squeeze it, you can't will it. But what you can do is learn how to be quiet and be comfortable with that, so the big idea can come. And as entrepreneurs, we're all looking for the big idea, right? We're all trying to find the thing. And you'll have better luck finding the thing if you can give yourself permission to not know, and to be quiet, and not put all that judgment on it.
That's terrific advice. And I want to get back to some of a few more of those sort of specific details, but Sabrina, let us know. We've got a great question in the Q&A.
Lay it on me.
Sabrina.
Yeah, we do. So maybe a quick one to answer, but it says, how do you say, do you believe in love in Polari?
Oh, I don't know. I have to go online for that. If somebody wants to do a Google search while we're talking, that would be great. I don't know if it's in Google Translate or not, but I haven't learned the language myself. I think that the only word I know is Jarry, Jarry, and it's like a state of well-being, I believe. There's a cooking and lifestyle magazine called Jarry, and that's where it comes from. But
all right.
and I think I know who asked that question, and I will talk to him later, but go on.
Well, getting back to sort of the practical steps, creativity, unlocking creativity to be a solution to sort of the problems of the moment we're in. I think about, we had that call with about 800 business owners and the Small Business Administration back in March, just as shutdowns really began in earnest.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that came out of that was people saying, I just don't know what bucket I fall in. Do I apply to this program or that program? Do I go to this office or that office? And of course, an artist heard that and went, you know what? You need to see this visually. And they, the SBA actually used a woman-owned company in graphic design, I found out, to help create a flow chart that said, is your business this? Great, go to this place for help. Oh, your business is this, go to this place for help. And that is an artist responding to a need. So tell us a little bit more about sort of that cognizance we should have as entrepreneurs to, when we may not always know that we're looking at an opportunity. So how can we find that?
So I think one of the ways to do that, and I believe there's a PDF you can download at the end of this. I have sort of 5 very simple questions that I always work with people with. And when you read them, you're going to be like, somebody paid money for these? These are so easy. And they seem simple on the surface, but if you kind of really explore them, I think you can start to learn just what you're saying, like where these gaps are or sort of how to make these kinds of connections. So one of the questions I ask people always is like, what are you doing? And I don't mean it in the like, what are you doing? And I usually find people are not clear about that. And that the question of what am I doing sort of functions on a whole lot of levels. And once you kind of break down those levels, you can start to see where those things are missing and sort of where those connections are not broken. So I'm going to give you an example. So this is like, I used to teach music history like 100 years ago. So like the composer Bach, and Bach had a job as the Kapellmeister. So his job was to write a cantata every Sunday. So it was music for the church service every Sunday that was performed by the local choir, most of whom were volunteers. They really weren't, quote unquote, professional musicians at the time. So you could say, what is he doing? His job was, I'm writing service music every week. But it was also fulfilling royal patronage. It had to exist, it had to be playable by people who were not professionals. It had to be able to include the congregation, probably 98% of whom were illiterate and couldn't read music either. And the tunes had to be simple enough that they could sing quickly and learn quickly. And then for Bach, all of his work was dedicated to his belief in God. So already you've got multiple layers of sort of who that work is for and what are you trying to do across those multiple layers. And I think for entrepreneurs, we tend to get sort of very tunnel vision about the product itself, or sort of just the one audience for that product. But there are so many layers of who you're doing that work for and why you're doing it. And I think the more people can dig into that and let those ripples go out, you'll start to find interesting gaps and interesting places and things that are special to what you're doing and what you have to offer. And I think, an example of that I would say too is, we're often taught as business people like to have a mission statement.
Sure.
And, something that will tell you what you're doing. And I think that's great. And I think it's a good way to articulate it. But you can also sort of turn that on its head a little bit and sort of say, well, who am I serving? What is this work serving? Who am I serving doing this work? And I prefer sort of looking at it from that standpoint, just because a relationship is easier to understand and there's a sense of reciprocal energy in that. You know, that you're giving something to people, they're giving something back to you. Whereas something like a mission statement, while it's clarifying, it can't really give anything back to you. You know, there's not, it's sort of, you know, there's this external, it's like the 10 Commandments, like do this or don't do it. And there's not a lot of room in the middle there. Whereas I think in a relationship, that's sort of something that's much more alive and human, and maybe it's a little messier in some ways, but that's useful information. The messy information is useful. I mean, if you think, you know, that's one of the things that we're all learning with our Zoom meetings. It's sort of, we're getting to see sort of a little bit of mess in people's lives. I have one person I see every week on Zoom whose cats are always, you know, in the screen. And the one cat loves to show his butt in the camera because that's what cats like to do. And it's made things a little more human between us. That, you know, so I think, you know, there's real value in sort of exploring that.
Talk to us a little bit about when you work with a client and sort of cracking that nut open to help them with their creative journey as it pertains to a business goal. How does that conversation go? And also, what do you do when there's resistance? Like, hey, I work at a big finance company. I'm just not a creative person. I do spreadsheets and, you know, data analytics. What are you talking to me for?
Well, you know, being able to read analytics is incredibly creative. You know, that's a very particular mindset. That's a very particular way of seeing the world. And it's sort of, you know, same thing like writing code.
Sure.
You know, you can't do that unless you are a creative person, unless you have some sort of particular way of expressing how numbers should work and what combinations are possible with that. So, you know, I think, I don't want to say like, you know, it's a client by client thing, you know, because people's goals are very different. But overall, what I generally find as sort of commonalities is, you know, the stuck point is I have this thing and I just don't quite know how to go forward. Or I have 10 ideas and I can't get started because there's 10 and I'm overwhelmed. So part of what I do is kind of try to tease out like what's the baseline idea? What's the significant thing that's driving that? And then a lot of it's, you know, practical.
Sure.
And one thing I can offer people is that I can really get my hands dirty on the project with them. I've had to work in sort of so many different ways throughout.
Could you give us a practical example, like what it's even if it's anonymized, but a way that you help do that?
Sure. So I'm sure some of you know Smith Banfield, ambassador extraordinaire and founder of ClearSpace. So Smith has just launched her wonderful book, also called ClearSpace, and I helped Smith sort of from an editorial standpoint, but when we started working together, she had written this huge first draft, and I was able to sort of get her from that to finished published book. And, you know, most of which was Smith's hard work and courage and willingness to sort of hang in there. And she's got a great book, and everybody should buy it because you'll learn all kinds of wonderful things in it. But a lot of my job was sort of just keeping her on the path going, because, you know, it's hard to own your own business. It's hard, you know, to sort of keep connecting to that purpose and that vision. You know, there's so many obstacles in the way, and it's shifting all the time too. And, you know, some days you're really up for the challenge, and some days it's harder. And I think that's a question, you know, we face whether we are a creative or an entrepreneur. You know, that faith in your vision is a hard thing to maintain always. So part of my job is to sort of just take the next step. Let's get, to the next thing. And then, I'm trying to make it even simpler. At the end of the day, everything is about storytelling. Whatever our product is, whatever our skill is, we're telling a story with it, and a story about how things could be or how we'd like them to be, and we want people to listen to the story, and we want people to benefit from that story. So, I'm there to help you figure out what is the story you're telling.
Well, and I echo that from a practical standpoint at the NGLCC. A lot of folks remember a couple of years back, we put out our America's LGBT economy report. Draft one was, it was the first time we've ever crunched the numbers of what LGBT suppliers and small business owners put out into the economy. Draft one was raw numbers. And while very exciting for nerds, it sure doesn't get a whole lot of people excited,
right,
to then take this information, talk about it at the water cooler. When we brought in some artists to help us design infographics and charts and ways to make this digestible, everything changed, and that report went all over the world in an afternoon. Right. So I think that's really sound advice. I'm going to toss to SVP Sabrina Kent with another great question from our audience.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks, Peter. This is really interesting overall. So Manuel says, how do you recommend making people in business more aware of their capacity to create, as well as the creativity in their work? Great question.
Great question.
That's a really good question. Can you ask it one more time? I'm going to buy a little time here.
Yes.
Read it one more time.
Yes. So how do you recommend making people in business more aware of their capacity to create, as well as the creativity in their work?
Okay, so part one, making businesses aware. I think a lot of this comes down to just imagination, and sort of not imagining things fully. And, businesses are, very structure driven, and they're very hierarchical. And as entrepreneurs, I think sometimes we have a hard time fitting into that structure because part of us wants the freedom, right? And yet we need structure at the same time. And I think, businesses can sort of shift the balance of that equation more towards the freedom side. I mean, I think we're finding that out now in this great working from home experiment that we're all engaged in, of sort of, what are the parameters people need to do their jobs? And what can we trust them with? Where can they have freedom? Where can we let them run with, really finding out how they need to work, so they can work effectively and quickly. And I think too, and this is an interesting question for us as queer people, because, how we fit into corporations or environments where historically we were not allowed to be open in our queerness. It took a lot of shifting of imagination and imagining roles more fully, that queer people could be visible within those structures. And then, people discovering sort of the contributions that can make. Because, I mean, from a business standpoint, no business just serves one kind of customer anymore. And as we get increasingly more niche driven and sort of more atomized, businesses need our knowledge of who we are and sort of what our particular needs are. So some of that is, I think, us speaking up for that, but a lot of it, I think, has to come from leaders as well, of sort of imagining that more fully.
And that's really the embodiment of the work NGLCC and a lot of our partners do with inclusion in the workplace for that reason. It's one thing, to just add people from different diverse backgrounds to check a box and say we have 2 of everything
Right.
doesn't help us. You have to put them in the space to say, what is your unique creative input on this project that only someone of your lived experience could share? I mean,
Correct.
I can count on 2 hands the number of times I bring up, you know, a show tune line as we're writing a press release for the DLC, thinking, you know, if we spin that just right, it'll get us there. But you know, we can use the creativity of sort of our own experience to get us somewhere.
Right. And I think, you know, and that's some of it is, you know, that's a trust thing too, of sort of learning that we can start trusting each other with that experience, you know, because I still think, you know, as queer people, you know, going into a boardroom or a conference room, I'm sure many of us still have to ask that question of kind of like, how out can I be here? And, you know, do I have to butch it up a little bit? You know, I'm lucky as a floral designer or someone who's worked in opera that, you know, people are really bummed if you're not gay. You know, if you show, like, who wants, you know, you want the fabulous florist to do your wedding. You don't want, like, you know, but, you know, I've had experiences. I had when one of my operas was produced, and this was in a sort of more conservative state. I was at a fundraising event for my project, and I was there sort of, you know, just a bit of a dog and pony show, but I was there to sort of represent the project and talk about it. And one of the potential funders came up to me, and I was wearing a navy blue blazer, a white shirt, and a pair of green chinos, which I got from, you know, the late lamented J. Crew. But honestly, I didn't, you know, I didn't think I had pushed the fashion envelope by any extreme. But she said to me, do other men where you come from wear those kind of pants? ... You big homo was really, you know, the next thing that she wanted to say. And it really stopped me, you know, because I was like, I'm in the room, and the room is, you know, for my project. And this is a question that still comes up. Mm-hmm. You know, to which I replied, yes, there's a store full of them. But, you know, but that's a really interesting area that we have to navigate and sort of start really speaking more honestly to each other about. And I don't think we answered the second part of Manuel's question, which was sort of...
Yeah, but talking about the creativity in your own work. We were starting to get there, but yeah. You know, I think to answer that question, I'm asking you to think about it also in terms of the context for a lot of our entrepreneurs who are very concerned about the moment we're in and looking for creative pivots. And I say that as we're doing all of these showcases on our blog, on our social media, of these businesses who have said, well, I do X, and with just a little tweaking, creative idea making, I can get to Y, which is not only another business model that's very useful right now, it's also something that can help a lot of people, like our, you know, a business owner in Florida who's sewing 1,000 masks.
Right.
We got, yeah, I think we mentioned on a previous webinar Wednesday, a liquor distiller in the DC area who converted their stills into making hand sanitizer and hospital cleaner. It's a creative solution that also stems from looking at the market. So talk to us a little bit about that. I think that helps answer Manuel's question about finding the creativity that also drives your business forward.
Right. Well, I think, you know, it comes back to sort of that, what am I doing question.
I ask myself that every morning.
Yeah, because, you know, let's say like the distiller. I mean, fundamentally, you're still you are still distilling. That is a tongue twister, but
that's a great point.
You know, so the thing you're doing hasn't changed, but you're able to sort of say, well, what if we just turned it a little bit? You know, it's kind of like the person who can walk into the room and straighten the picture so it's just perfect, you know, being able to see that. And I think that's the key, is sort of allowing yourself to see that and sort of allowing yourself the space to move around in that. Because I think, you know, culturally we're so raised to like, you do the one thing, even though that's changing historically. I think many of us still have the mindset like, this is what I do and this is what my job entails. And there's an idea, I think, particularly with creativity, that somehow it's always this great sort of flash of inspiration and like the, the heavens part and you get this huge insight. Sometimes it really is just like, what if I turn this upside down?
Mm-hmm.
I have a photograph that I love that I did. And I always liked it. I thought it was a nice picture, but it just didn't, something about it didn't quite work. And then when I was printing it, it fell out of the printer and landed upside down. I was like, wait, it needs to be upside down. It's really a very simple solution. I didn't have to do another shoot. It really was just turning the picture upside down.
Sure.
And I think we have to kind of allow ourselves to sort of start breathing in that atmosphere and sort of, again, that question of saying like, well, what's possible? And what's possible is a hard question because, there can be negative possibilities, there can be positive possibilities. Again, all of
failure in that, which is always scary for entrepreneurs.
Right.
That's where I was going to go with my next question, and you're getting us right there. Is so sometimes we are all. It may not always be a eureka moment. It might just be like you said, just flip the picture upside down or try a different font. What happens when it doesn't go well? Should you let that destroy your confidence and your creativity?
No, I think what you have to do is ask more questions about that, because often what that means is something's not fully cooked yet. It's an idea that is not fully formed, or it's something you're not ready to do yet either. I mean, I find generally that's a huge commonality, that sometimes we have a sense of an idea, and if it's the thing that you just can't get right, it may not be ready.
Yeah.
And it also just may mean you need to step back from it for a little bit and let it just settle. I spoke earlier about, again, that sense of quiet and sort of allowing quiet. And I think that's a case where, you say, okay, here's this idea. It's not quite working. I'm going to let this sit and I'm going to be quiet with it for a while. Two things will happen. It'll go away. And that means, there just wasn't a sound idea and, you were going to beat your head against the wall. Or it will really sort of flower in its fullest form. And, and it's a challenge for us as entrepreneurs, because we do have to be adaptive and quick and responsive. So I get that tension, but sometimes things are slow, and there's a lot of really great possibility and information in that space between those two things. And it's more that we're just uncomfortable with that, more than that it's a problem, that it's just tension. And things that are sort of pulling against each other. But I think as entrepreneurs, and I know everyone has had this experience, the project you don't fully believe in, the project that you're not fully invested in, that doesn't come from sort of, your truest expression, will never work. You won't be able to sell it well, because people pick up on that on some level, that you're not truly convicted about it, or that you're just trying to sell them. And I think, entrepreneurs are artists in the sense that the work is an expression of who they are, and what they believe and the value of that. And, that's the thing we want to get to, because that's the thing that will have some real power in the world, and the thing that will be meaningful both to you as a maker, but also to people who can benefit from it. And I think, that's where it connects back to queerness. It's the thing that's special about us. And when we finally allow that out in the world, that's when things start to happen. So.
Well said. I want to take the chance, while we've got just a few minutes left, if anyone on the line has any last minute burning questions, to use the Q&A tab. Of course, you see the website, email, and Instagram for Peter on the screen here. And we'll be sending all of this information as well as a link to his PDF on the Creativity Guide as a wrap out to this call. But Peter, as we're coming to a close here on this hour, and I think we could all sit and talk about creativity for days. What do you want people to take away from today? How do you want them to leave this webinar and go back out into, well, say out into the world, or at least out into their living room? And,
the other room you get to explore.
Yes, exactly. And unleash their creativity in their business.
I would say two things. A, keep going, or several things. Keep going. It's okay that it's hard. Yeah. I mean, I'm a writer by training, and people always say to me, oh, you write so well, it must be easy for you. It's hard. I hate writing. It's difficult, and that's okay. It just means that you're engaged in a really deep, alive way. And I think, that's the kind of energy, those are the kind of answers that we all need now going forward. And, we're being forced to ask really big questions, and we're going to have to sort of pull some of that out. But I want everyone to stop believing that they're not creative. You are. It's there, and no matter what your second grade teacher said, it's it's there. And give your self the space for it. Listen for it. And I also I wanted to make the offer too that, you have my contact information. Send me an email, give me a call. I always do a 45-minute free phone consultation with anybody just to sort of get started, just to get them talking about what it is they're doing. I'm super interested. I learn so much from the people I work with. There's an astounding amount of creativity out there, and an astounding amount of queer creativity. And, I'm really passionate and excited about sort of helping people get to the thing they want to make, because it really is doable, and it's okay to ask for help.
Absolutely. Sabrina, I think we have time for I see we have a bunch of questions coming in. Pick your favorite.
Okay, well, I think we can couple two of them into one. And for folks who are wondering, if you want to review the recorded webinar, you can do so at nglcc.org/webinars. We'll put that there in the chat window. But again, that's nglcc.org/webinars. So two final and pressing questions. The first is from Manuel. Does Peter know if J. Crew has any more of those fetching green pants? And if they're the ones I'm thinking of, they're probably the Kelly Green, and I love those ones. So there's that one.
Apparently they do, but my understanding is J. Crew has filed for bankruptcy. So I would say go to their online store and get them now. They've got stuff to
get
vintage.
Yeah.
There we go. And then the last question, can you touch on one of the other four questions of your 5 questions for creativity?
Oh yeah, actually, Peter, would you want to just run through what those questions are, and then we'll send that out as a PDF to everyone?
Oh gosh, I have to see if I can remember them. I wasn't prepared. But what am I doing? What do I need to do this? What tools do I need to do this? Who is this for? And I cannot remember the last one.
That's all right. They'll be on
That's why I have a PDF, because
you're off the hook. Don't worry.
I need my cheat sheet. But I think the one that's really important is the "Who is this for?" question. That is a gold mine. You would be amazed at sort of how knotted that question and confused that question can get. So that's really worth spending some time on, because again, that's where everybody's second grade teacher who said they weren't creative shows up, because I will show you second grade teacher that I am creative. So
Well, Peter, we really appreciate you are as much an outstanding artist as you are an outstanding business person, and we're grateful to have you in the NGLCC family. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. So,
Thank you.
why don't you tell everyone what we have coming up both next week on Webinar Wednesday, and I hear we have some exciting announcements about Fridays.
Yes, we do. So I'll start with Sip and Pitch Fridays. So as you all may be aware, Friday, April 24th was our first LGBT Sip and Pitch Fridays program. It was a hit both on the corporate and supplier side. So as a result, we've moved that program to be twice weekly. So stay tuned for communications coming out from NGLCC as it relates to that. But our next program for LGBT Sip and Pitch Fridays will be May 15th. Throw your hat in the ring. We've got some amazing corporate judges on the roster. So stay tuned for that. And then, of course, next week, we're back with another Webinar Wednesdays program, Working from Home Time Mastery Tips by Joshua Skye. Josh is an incredible presenter. He's done some work specifically for the NGLCC team, so we're excited to bring his light to all of you next week. And, of course, a big, big thank you again to Peter for today's conversation, and everybody stay safe and be well.
Thanks you all.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Bye.